Hello, I'm State Representative Rosemary Brown, and welcome to the Legislative Report. I'm joined with Eileen Miller, who we were saying, how will we title you, Eileen? And I think it's a broad way that we can title Eileen, but roadside, roadway, advocate, traffic safety advocate, concerned citizen, good person.
Well, thank you.
Wonderful mother. So
thank you.
There's all these titles for you, but I've had the pleasure of knowing you for several years, and I wanted to do a show with you because of what you have been doing, because of your story, which we are going to tell the viewers. But you have so much information, and you have so much that you've encountered throughout your work, that I thought you'd be a great resource and a great person to talk to our local viewers a little bit about some of our road safety and some of the things that people should be thinking about, and I think people are concerned about. But just bringing it to light, bringing it to the table, and having a very educated conversation with somebody who's been very much involved with it as well. And then we could talk a little bit about my efforts of trying to become more involved as a legislator too.
Right.
So Eileen, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I'm Eileen Miller. I'm from Scranton, Pennsylvania. And we met 7 years ago at the Safe 80 Task Force. Right. What happened, how I got to actually join that group is the Pocono Record at the time was running a Drive to Stay Alive campaign. And the reason that I got into that was because of my son got killed in a distracted driving crash. He was killed on July 5th of 2010 on Route 33, which is right here in Monroe County. And kind of reached out to them as soon as Paul got killed, and I'll tell you how that unfolded. My son, first of all, was a 21-year-old full of life person. He was going for criminal justice at ESU, and he was just such a fun-loving, wonderful kid. Had his full life ahead of him, and in a second his life was taken. On the 4th of July, he was going to visit friends from ESU. Told us, you know, July 4th he worked at Garrity's. He worked 2 part-time jobs, and he was going full-time to school. 3 o'clock, he finished work at Garrity's, and he came in and said, "Mom, I'm going to go to a party on the 4th of July. Came in, walked in the door, kissed and hugged me like he always did. Said, "Mom, I'm going to go visit friends. I'll be home tonight." And kissed and hugged me, walked out the door, said, "I love you," like we always did, and never knew that that was the last time I would ever see my son alive. Wound up, he was further than he had thought. He wound up being all the way down in Bethlehem. The party was further than he had thought. But he did everything right. You know, he called and said that he was going to stay over. I actually didn't get that call. He called at 6 o'clock. Back then, even, he did not like to leave voicemails. He did not like to text. He did not like to do any of those things. So he called me. I didn't find out till after he had passed, 6 o'clock, and I wasn't home yet. He had called at 10 o'clock. I missed that call. I was in the shower. So he wound up calling friends and said, "Call my mom and tell her I'm not coming home." He wound up having, he told his friend, "I'm not drunk. I had 2 drinks, but I don't know where I am. I don't know the destination. I don't want to drive home because I don't know where I am." So my son did everything right, and somebody else made a bad choice. So he wound up staying over in Bethlehem, and he was on his way home on July 5th. Again, he called his work and said, "I'm going to be late. I don't know where I am." And Garrity said, "Paul, it's July 5th. There's nobody here. Take your time. When you get here, go home, take a shower. We're slow." So he didn't show up for work. They weren't concerned because they told him, "Don't worry about that." Yeah. Right. So he was coming north, and a tractor trailer was coming south. And people for miles from 80 saw him going onto Route 33, kind of off the road, lane switching, speeding up, and people actually tried to get away from the tractor trailer. They were afraid for their life. And he was jacked. What happened is when he was coming south, he was off and on, and then people saw him trying to overcorrect. And what happened is he crossed the 2 lanes of highway, that grassy medium, and hit Paul head on and pushed him back and into an embankment. And then there was a van with 12 people behind my son, and then they crashed into the tractor trailer. So what had happened is, you know, he didn't come home. I thought he came home and went right to work.
Right.
So
Nobody's concerned.
Nobody's concerned. I didn't know what was going on. You know, it was odd because that morning I woke up and I had a pit in my stomach, not knowing what it was. And my brother at the time, he was in the hospital, and I thought it might have been him, not thinking it was my son. So I was having a party that day, and I was having a bunch of people coming, and they were calling me saying, "Are you still having the party?" And I'm like, I have a feeling something's wrong with my brother, but all along it was my son. So I had 2 state troopers pull up a little bit before my house, and I ran down to them, and in my gut I kept saying, "Is there something wrong with my son?" And they were like, "Did somebody already call you, ma'am?" And I was like, "No," but I knew deep in my heart. And they didn't want to tell me because they weren't sure. What had happened is they pulled up my husband's car, because it was registered under him, and they saw my husband's picture, but they knew it wasn't him.
Right.
And then they pulled up my son, and they couldn't really confirm because we didn't know this at the time, but my son's body was dragged out and all down the highway. So we came in, sat down, and they were kind of, you know, "Why would your son be down in, you know, all the way down to 33? And we're like, "Route 33, I've never heard of that in my life." And they're like, "Well, it's kind of down by ESU." And we were like, "Well, he was going that way." And then we started giving him descriptions. You know, he has a Celtic cross. That wasn't on them, but they didn't tell us all the facts, because what had happened is they sent local state troopers that were up in Dunmore, not down here. So going back and forth, needless to say, you know, I was screaming on my knees because at that point we had assumed, you know, that it was my son. I told them I was coming down to see him, and they told me they couldn't because he was a criminal case, you know. But he didn't come home, so where was he? So I wanted to come down to Pocono Medical because they told me he was going there, and they said the road is closed due to the reconstruction. It's not going to be open till 3 o'clock. And they kept telling me, "Mrs. Miller, you can't view him, you can't view him." And I told them, "He's mine. I'm coming down to view him." So we made arrangements that I did, and then I did go into the morgue, and he's a criminal case, so they can't clean him up. So I did go in, and I told the woman who was the coroner, I said, "I have to unzip his body bag because I can't tell it's him." Because he was so badly injured, and he had glass and everything in there. So I unzipped his body bag, and they were the clothes from the night before, and that's how I recognized my son. And it was the worst and hardest day of my life. And I whispered in his ear that I would find out how he died, and I would do whatever it took to find out what it was, and I would make change. And I was going to fight to make change, and I didn't want anybody to ever have to view their child like that. There's no reason for it. So,
you know, Eileen, this is so hard, and it's so hard for you to do this, and I thank you because I know, just kind of reliving it, but you know, one of the reasons
it's
because
important
for people to know really the personal and how difficult and how this shouldn't happen.
It shouldn't. It's all preventable.
Right,
it's 100% avoidable.
I thank you, and I'm sorry because I know it's hard to
relive it. It's hard, but I have to do it because you don't want one other person to go through it, and it's so preventable. That's the hardest part about this, is it's so preventable. And it's happening every day, and it's an epidemic, and people keep doing it, and they think it's never going to be me. They think it's never going to be me, and you don't want it to be you. I don't want it to be you, and I don't want it to be anybody out there in our audience.
Have to go through anything.
But it's happening more and more and more because everybody thinks they can do it, you know. And I know that day that he didn't intentionally do that, but that's the problem. These are addicting. Right. They're 100% addicting, and they're happening every day, and it's getting worse. And that's why I'm thankful for you for what you're doing. And we really need law enforcement, we need education, and we need legislation. Right. And that's why we're here today. And I can't thank you enough for that. And unfortunately, that's how I got to meet you, was because I then started out there.
You've been at
7 years.
Safe 80s. Yeah, you've been, I mean, like you said, you're from Scranton, but you've been all over. Yeah. And you've been speaking a lot, and I know your
everywhere,
husband has been involved
too. Right, every day.
So, you know, in your commitment to Paul, you know, as his mother and everything, it's wonderful that you are working so hard to help.
Right.
So you know, you've been down to Harrisburg, so you know.
I live in Harrisburg.
You live in Harrisburg, you know.
I live in Harrisburg. You see me there all the time.
Yes, and so I know that you have seen different legislative proposals go through and everything.
They just don't go through. They try to go through, but they keep being blocked.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, so you know, so trying to come up, it's got to be terribly upsetting on your end too, because I know it on my end it is. And so, but when you look at some of the stats, and you were really good today, because you were talking a little before we started the show about some of the stats, and you have some stats, and you have some things. So before we go into further discussions about legislative efforts and things like that, throw out some stats to people that you think, and I know you have a lot. Right.
Well, I don't really like stats, because I think stats are, you know, they change all the time, unfortunately. They change a lot.
But to give a general,
this is just off the PennDOT, you know, reportable crash fatality statistics statewide. So these are crash fatalities. 2010, when Paul got killed, 66. 2011, 59. 2012, 57 died. 2013, 64. 2014, 55. 2015, 66. And then 2016, 69. Now, these are only the ones reported. We don't know that, because like when Paul died in 2010, he's just a road crash fatality. They never even looked into the cell phone.
So to say what's distracted and what's not, like what was the cause of the accident, they don't list it as far as that. So those are total fatalities.
Totally fatalities.
But they don't list it. They don't, that would be,
Right. So then we have statewide serious injuries for distracted driving. Now, these are just pulled off PennDOT's page. 2010, 256. 2011, 216. 2010, 258. 2013, 216. 2014, 177. 2015, 232. And then 2016, 402. So see the increase? Because these are becoming more popular.
Right.
So they're really starting to go up. You know what I mean? They're really starting to jump.
Right.
So it's like, you know, we're starting getting into statistics. So 71% of distractions are on our phones. 71%. They're very high. You're 23 times more likely to get in a crash by texting. So if I said to you, and people don't think about this, but if I said, Rosemary, why don't you get in your car and blindfold yourself and drive down the road? You're going to go the length of a football field blindfolded. You wouldn't ever do it, but literally that's what people are doing when they're getting behind their wheel and they're driving, because they're texting. They're looking down. They're not looking up. That's exactly what they're doing. Think about it. You would never do it, but every time you see people, what are they doing when they're on their phone when they're looking down? And you see it every day. So that's why people are getting in crashes and they're dying every day, because they're constantly looking down. And then you look at the apps. You have now Snapchat. You know, they're doing their selfies. They're doing all of these things. They're searching their internet. They're not just talking on their phone. They're doing all of these apps that constantly keep coming up at all times throughout the day. So this is something that Smart Tech. Now, this is a company that comes out that is really watching what people do on their phone. They're a great company. So what they're doing is looking at all distractions. They're saying that 88% of people that have smartphones, 88% of them are driving using their phones, and they're on their handheld. 1 in every 3 that are on them, 88% of them, 1 out of 3 are in front of the schools that are doing it, and they're doing unsafe behavior in schools. So 1 out of 3. And 88% out of 100 are on their phones.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's a high percentage. That's a lot. And now what they're doing is finding out of the United States where all these hotspots are, like New York is a big one, in California. And then what they're doing is they're sending police out to those areas to watch them, because, and most of them are in the afternoon at high traffic areas. So these are smart. They're using actually technology
to get a little smarter about how to enforce
to get enforcement,
for safety.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's,
which makes sense.
Which makes sense, you know. So they're really getting out there, you know, doing stuff. So in Smart Talk in Pennsylvania court, I looked up this yesterday. They do shows on distracted driving. Citations increased by 52% from 2014 to 2016, just in Pennsylvania alone. Their citations went up 52%. So I'm not really a stats girl. I don't like, because it changes.
You're right.
But information is good.
It is.
And going to enforce the law which you're coming out with for legislation.
Exactly. Well, you know, and they help just give a little bit of a mindset, you know, of, well, here's the fatalities, but we haven't always kind of said,
right.
hey, what's distracted, what's not, and what all the different types of distraction that you may
right.
have on top of the phones.
Right, right.
But, you know, but there is a lot of stats that I right. think can help people understand the seriousness
right.
of what's happening.
It's what's happening. It's an addiction. It's a terrible addiction.
It is, and
you know, people always want that, you know, and I always tell people, and this is something that happened with me, you know, when there's a crash too, you know, people right away, they're not going to help people. They're grabbing their phones and they're recording it and uploading it and putting it up before even families are notified. You know, if you see a crash,
yeah.
they want to hurry up and upload it before, you know, that happened to Paul. I never knew Paul's body was out and dragged down. I never knew that. The police never told me that. Remember, I told you that. It wasn't until somebody called me and said to me, Mrs. Miller, Paul's crash is on Hamilton Township crash. That's when I looked at it, and there was a tarp laying on the side of the road. And I never knew Paul's, but I didn't understand it because we were telling him he had tattoos. I didn't understand it until I looked, and I saw his picture was on the news. Now the news showed it, but they showed his car. They never showed the yellow tarp. They never. Right. And then I got angry, and I kind of went after the Pocono Record, and they showed me all the pictures, and they did not have it. And they said somebody had to be at that scene. Taking those pictures, and I later found out who it was, and I was furious.
Yeah, it's changing. It's
so
changing.
The culture is changing. The mentality. People are taking pictures of life, and they're showing it. And a lot of my families, I know that this has happened to. You know what I mean? People are not thinking with their heads. They're thinking, you know,
because they're surrounded. They're surrounded to this so much.
That has changed our life. Yeah. The cell phone has changed our reality. Yeah. You know, and I know a lot of families that it's happened to. So people are not thinking, you know, they want that self-gratification, they want that, and that's why we're dying. I just saw yesterday where a female, not in our country, but in another country, you know, was recording her friend as she was sticking her body out the window and recording her, and she whacked her head, and she was actually in a provocative thing, and she's a mother, and she got killed because somebody else was recording her, and she whacked her head off of the sign, sticking her head out the window, and she got killed. I mean, that's not the right thing to be doing, but our culture is changing, you know, and it's all about self-gratification and, you know, addiction. It is. Every time people get this, and whether it's an email, you know, whether you're Snapchatting, a text, you get a ping, and what happens, you get a squirt of dopamine off of your brain, and it makes you want to go for it. It's just like a drug, it's like a drink, it's like anything, you know. And people always say to me, Mrs. Miller, what's the best app for me to use? And I always say, see this little button right there? It's called the off button. It's called the off button. There's no text, there's no cell phone, there's nothing that's that important than the life. Right. There's nothing. And I've learned that the hard way. I've really learned it the hard way. There's not, my husband, you know, you know my husband Paul, a year after my son got killed, my husband started falling, started tripping, walking into walls, and it took us a while to get a diagnosis, but he wound up getting ALS. And people don't understand the after effects of when you lose your child, of what happens, and definitely, they believe the stress and anxiety. I saw it. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind the stress and anxiety from that triggered it. And people need to know that, that even now when I go out, I know my husband, you know, that he has his issues and I don't want to leave him alone, but I still turn it off because I know when I get to my destination, then I'll turn on my phone and then I'll call my husband and say, are you okay, or what do you need?
I like that. The best app is the off button.
Is the off button.
Is the off button. And with that, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with the legislative report. If you have children but no health insurance, you may qualify for free or reduced coverage under a special state program. I'm State Representative Rosemary Brown. The Children's Health Insurance Program provides benefits to uninsured Pennsylvania children whose families don't qualify for medical assistance but can't afford health insurance. If you believe your family is eligible, you should apply as soon as possible. For information on income eligibility requirements and how to apply, please contact my office. Welcome back to the Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Rosemary Brown, and continuing our conversation with Eileen Miller, a wonderful person who has been very involved in our community and across the state of Pennsylvania in regards to road safety and specifically distracted driving. And Eileen shared with us her personal story of her son Paul in passing due to a distracted driver. And so thank you, Eileen. I know that was difficult, but we greatly appreciate showing the importance of all your efforts that you're doing. So we're going to just go a little bit into the direction of the law and legislative, and obviously we're not going to make everything perfect in our world. I always say this, like you can't legislate the world.
Right.
And I mean, it's almost like with every subject, and I say it a lot when I'm out and about, but we can do things to try to help the environment.
Of course. With
all the issues we're dealing with. But the piece of legislation, House Bill 1684, which I have introduced, yes, we're getting good, very good response, and sometimes timing is everything, and but unfortunately over the years, these pieces of legislation which you have watched, which really are aiming for our viewers to reduce distracted driving, specifically with cell phone use, because that seems to be with the technology enhancements, it's just getting stronger and stronger. And right before we hit the break with the show, we were talking about the addictive quality of these phones and how we are all enjoying the technology in many ways for the good that it has, but there's also a lot of additional downsides to this technology, and that includes not driving with it when, or texting with it, which we're all getting the text messages, we're all getting this as we're driving, and it's very difficult to turn, your head to it and your back to it. And you had mentioned, shut the phone off, which I think even myself, everybody needs to be reminded, shut it off, and we have to, get smart with this, and it has to be a new mentality.
Right.
So the piece of legislation I proposed is to at least hands-free only in Pennsylvania. Now, if you look, and you know this, and some of our viewers may not, is the state of Pennsylvania around us in the Northeast, almost every state has, where you cannot talk on the phone with it up to your ear. So you can use your hands-free technology. And then the legislation also states 18 and under, no cell phone at all. At all.
That's terrific.
Yeah, so it's, again, some of this is, I think, in the mindset of me to be very realistic, to say it's something we can enforce.
Of course, yes.
And, when you see it up to your ear, you can enforce it. We have traffic safety experts talking about having your hands on the wheel at all time. And you mentioned the phrase to me before we started the show.
Yeah, eyes on the road, hands on the wheel, mind a task.
Mind a task.
Correct.
And I think that's really a great reminder for everyone that's, you get in the car, you're supposed to be driving. And so
driving only.
And we're so used to this, well, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this now, and with the technology. And for safety reasons, it's great to have an emergency to be able to call. But it's, so the hands-free, although I think it's enforceable, whatever, and we've spoken about this, you're still distracted.
Correct.
But we have minimized it.
Minimized it.
Versus
everybody driving like that. And I say the same thing all the time. Everywhere you go, you see everybody. If you go to any corner and you stop, even for 5 minutes, you'll see 85, 95% of the people all have this. They do. And you know who they are. And you see who they are when they're driving, because they're always all over the road, or they're lane switching or that. So yes, is it a step forward? Definitely, it's definitely going to save lives. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind. And I believe that that's in Paul's crash. I really believe that that's what he was doing, was reaching for his phone by his statements. So if that was in effect, I really believe that would have saved Paul's life. I really, with all my heart and soul, believe that. So it's definitely, no doubt in my mind, going to save lives. You are distracted in your brain even when you are speaking on your Bluetooth. There's no doubt. But having this in your hand is no doubt in my mind going to save lives.
Well, you look and you say, well, you can look at stats, like you said, and stats can be good, bad, and different. They can change. But on a common sense level,
absolutely,
one less thing to have juggling or whatever else it would be, that you should be driving.
Your hands
only.
Absolutely need to. That's your main goal, is just to drive, and that's what nobody's doing it this day. you know, there are a lot of distractions. I mean, but without a doubt, that's the #1 right now distraction. Like I read the stats, is everybody's on their cell phone. And like you said, every neighboring state, everywhere I go, everybody's like, I was just in New York. I just got an $800 fine. You know, I'm not going in New York. Well, it's time for Pennsylvania to step up. It's time for them to get on this bill, and it's time for them to do it. It's been a long fight.
To strengthen it, and you know the area, even from Scranton, from Monroe County, the commuter population to New York and New Jersey.
It's huge.
They're driving through these states, that the consistency of the law too.
It's time for us to do it. Yeah,
I mean, it should be consistent.
I've been fighting this a long time, and every time, you know, it goes dead and it goes dead, and I've been fighting this a long time. I'm tired, you know. It's time for them to get on board. I'm telling my story a long time. I'm fighting this a long time. I've been begging a long time, and we really need to get this to go through. And it's definitely going to save. It's not a Democrat-Republican issue. It's a life issue. It's a human life, and it's going to save lives. It's going to save lots of lives.
It's a very modern issue of the technology and what we're dealing with.
Right.
So
and it's just going to get worse. It's just going to get worse, and we really need for them to step up to the plate and to do it. It really is.
And it's interesting, you know, as the legislation came out and as we've been discussing, and different news reports have been doing you know, stories on the legislation and on the subject. They'll do interviews with people on the street, you know, as you see on a normal TV show. And it's amazing. Every person that they have interviewed has said, absolutely, I agree, it should be that way. And so, you know, if you were cited as doing it against the law, but I think most people from the interviews and the feedback that I've been getting and the letters that I've been getting has been that they understand and appreciate the enhancement it would hopefully give to their safety of them, their family, and their friends on the road. So it really seems like this point, and I know it's been several years for you, and there's been legislation in and out, but it does seem at this point, hopefully, you know, the support is getting stronger, and the efforts and the common sense appreciation for the legislation to be there in Harrisburg. So we hope so, and thank you, because I know you're helping with all of your efforts as well to push our committee.
I knew, you know, I'm going to be honest, when I knew this from the beginning, you know, when I started this, I knew legislation was going to be hard. I never thought I would be in the seat. I was always a safety mom way even before Paul got killed. You know, I was always the mom that, you know, raised her scooters. I had the knee pads and the helmets when Paul was into skateboarding. You know, when I had a pool in my backyard, was the one making sure I had CPR lessons. I never thought that I would be the one to be there looking at my son at the morgue. But I never thought that common sense laws would be so hard to pass. I just didn't think that common sense laws, even us, what I get told a lot is, well, you know, we don't have a helmet law for motorcycles, that got taken away, and we don't have a seatbelt law. It's a secondary law. Why don't you work on that? You know, so I get that thrown in my face a lot, but I'm constantly fighting, I'm constantly trying, I'm constantly showing them pictures of my son at the morgue. I mean, I show them, I don't like showing that picture, but I'm like, pass it, please pass it. Don't think it's not. We
understand why.
We were last August, we were hit again. We got hit again by another distracted driving. Our van that we just got for my husband, we were hit on 80 again. So it's not a matter of if it's going to happen to you, it's a matter of when it's going to happen to you. And I'm trying to stop that and to avoid that from happening to anybody else. You know, I mean, that's twice we were affected. You know what I mean? I lost my child, and then we got taken in the ambulance again, and I'm still going to therapy for my back from that. So it's happening over and over and over again, and it's just going to keep getting worse.
And Eileen, you know that the show goes so fast.
I know.
You know, it goes so fast, and you know, there's so much we could talk about here, but I want to thank you.
No, I want to thank you for our 7 years of working to do what's right, and I'm really praying this time that this really goes through, because it's really hard. It's not easy. I mean, I do it every day. You know, whether it's one person at a grocery store that I see trying to pull away on their phone, I go over and I talk to them, or I'm speaking to 1,200 students at a school, or I'm talking to a company trying to get them to ban the cell phone policy. It's my life now, and it's my passion, and, you know, ALS is also, but we have to get this done. We need education. We need law enforcement, and we need education, right? So
thank you.
Thank you, and please, people, please stay off your phones, and please do not drive distracted. in memory of my son and all of the thousands of people that have been lost to road tragedy.
Thank you, Eileen.
Thank you.
It's a good way to end the show, and thank you for watching the Legislative Report. If you have any questions regarding this matter or any other state-related issue, please feel free to contact my office.